Number 12. The Dashka Stone, the map of the creator. In 1999, a professor named Alexander Chuvirov was searching for evidence of ancient habitation in the Ural Mountains of Russia. He wasn't looking for a map, he was looking for burial mounds. Instead, in the village of Chandar, he unearthed a 1-ton stone slab that has become the single most controversial artifact in Russian history. Known as the Dashka Stone, this isn't a flat drawing, it is a 3-dimensional relief map, a topographic model of the Ural region. It uses a technology that shouldn't exist in nature or in antiquity, consisting of 3 layers: a dolomite base, a diopside glass layer that forms the map itself, and a porcelain protective cap. The map depicts the Ural landscape, but with terrifying additions. It shows a gigantic system of civil engineering works, 12,000 miles of channels, massive weirs, and 2 enormous dam systems that would dwarf anything built today. The map contains inscriptions in a vertical hieroglyphic language that has not been deciphered. Here's the kicker. Based on the shell samples embedded in the stone to create the markers, some researchers dated the origin of the sediment to 120 million years ago. While that date is hotly contested, even a date of 5,000 years makes the technology impossible. To carve a 3-dimensional relief map of this scale requires an aerial perspective. You need to be flying to see the mountains in this way. Skeptics claim the map is just a series of natural fissure networks in the rock that happen to look like a landscape, a case of pareidolia, like seeing a face in a cloud. But the precision of the layers and the hardness of the diopside glass suggest artificial machining. If this is a map, it wasn't made by humans with chisels. It was made by a civilization that could fly and shape stone like clay. But while stone maps are immovable, our next map is famous for being drawn on something much lighter, yet carrying a secret just as heavy. Number 11. The Urbano Monte Planosphere, 1587. In 1587, a wealthy nobleman in Milan named Urbano Monte finished a masterpiece that would sit in a dusty library unappreciated for over 400 years. It wasn't until 2017 that Stanford University geographers scanned his work, an atlas of 60 separate manuscript sheets, and digitally stitched them together. The result was a massive 10-foot-wide circular map of the world that looked shockingly modern. Unlike the standard maps of his time, which distorted the world to fit a rectangle, Monte drew the Earth from a north polar projection, looking down from the top of the world. This is the exact same projection used in the emblem of the United Nations today, a perspective that implies an understanding of the planet's spherical geometry that was centuries ahead of its time. When you zoom in on the southern hemisphere of Monte's map, the anomaly screams at you. Like the others we will discuss, Monte depicts a massive southern continent, but he doesn't draw it as a frozen wasteland. He draws a lush, habitable zone teeming with life. He sketches grassy plains, camel-like creatures, and even mythical beasts roaming a land that should be dead ice. He labels these areas with descriptions of a temperate climate. He noted that his source data came from ancient geographers, implying he was aggregating knowledge from a time when the ecosystem of the South was radically different. He didn't see the ice, he saw the land beneath it. Historians argue that Monte was just exercising artistic license, filling the unknown voids with imaginary creatures to make the map look pretty for his patrons. They say the polar projection was just a lucky experiment in geometry, but the precision of the coastlines in relation to the curvature of the Earth suggest he understood the math of the globe better than NASA gives the 16th century credit for. But if you think a green Antarctica is disturbing, wait until you see the map that claims to pinpoint the most famous lost continent of all.
Number 10. Athanasius Kircher's Map of Atlantis, 1665. This is the big one. While other maps hint at lost lands, this one screams it. Athanasius Kircher was a 17th century Jesuit scholar, a master of 100 arts who studied everything from volcanoes to hieroglyphics. In his massive book Mundus Subterraneus, he published a map that is unlike any other in history. It isn't a map of the known world, it is a fully detailed, labeled map of Atlantis. Kircher didn't present this as a myth or a metaphor, he presented it as geographical history. He claimed he discovered the original map in a library in the Vatican, a document that had been stolen from Egypt by the Romans centuries prior. The map shows a massive continent, roughly the size of Australia, sitting squarely in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But here is the detail that gives you chills. The map is oriented with south at the top. This is exactly how ancient Egyptian maps were drawn, as the Egyptians oriented themselves upriver towards the source of the Nile in the south. The shape of Kircher's Atlantis oddly mirrors the shape of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the underwater mountain chain that sneaks through the ocean floor today. If you squint, it looks like a puzzle piece that fits between America and Africa. Kircher labeled the islands and rivers of this lost land with absolute confidence. Skeptics dismiss Kircher as an eccentric who loved tall tales, arguing he invented the map to visualize Plato's allegory and sell more books. But Kircher was one of the first scientists to understand that the Earth was a dynamic, changing object. His map is the ultimate piece of forbidden cartography because it dares to visualize the one thing science says is impossible. Kircher's map asks us a haunting question.
if the mid-Atlantic ridge is actually a submerged scar? Is this map a fantasy, or is it a memory? And if the middle of the world is a mystery, the bottom of the world is an impossibility. Number 9. The Oronteus Finaeus map, 1531. 18 years after the famous Piri Reis map, which we'll get to, a French mathematician named Orontius Fineus published a heart-shaped map of the world. Fineus was no fringe lunatic, he was a respected scholar in Paris. His map includes a massive southern continent centered precisely on the South Pole. But unlike other maps that only showed a vague coastline, Fineus went all in. He depicted the interior. He drew mountain ranges, winding rivers, and deep valleys on a continent that, according to the history books, wouldn't be officially seen by human eyes for another 3 centuries. The detail is nauseatingly specific. Fineus depicts river estuaries in the Ross Sea region. Today, looking at that spot, all you would see is the Ross Ice Shelf, a floating slab of glacial ice hundreds of feet thick. However, in 1949, core samples taken from the Ross Sea floor revealed layers of fine-grained sediment, the kind that is only carried by flowing rivers from a temperate climate. This means that at some point in human history, someone had to have been there to chart those rivers before the big freeze set in. The Fineus map isn't just a lucky guess, it essentially matches the sub-glacial topography of the entire continent. The conventional explanation is that Renaissance cartographers had a horror vacui, a fear of empty spaces, and just filled the bottom of the world with land to balance the north. They claimed the rivers and mountains were just artistic doodles that happened to align with geological reality by sheer accident. But asking us to believe that a man in 1531 accidentally guessed the exact location of buried mountain ranges is a statistically impossible pill to swallow. It implies that Fineus had access to ancient source data from a time when the poles were temperate. But if the ice confuses you, the next map shows what happens when the land itself breaks apart.
Number 8. The Philippe Buache map, 1737. Jump forward to the 18th century. Philippe Buache was the foremost geographer of his time, holding the title of Geographer to the King of France. He was a man of science, rigorous and precise. In 1737, he published a map of Antarctica that is arguably the most puzzling of them all. While previous maps showed a single massive continent, Buache depicted Antarctica as 2 separate landmasses, divided by a massive frozen waterway running through the center. He labeled this the Frozen Sea. For 200 years, this map was considered a bizarre anomaly, a rare mistake by a brilliant man. Then came the International Geophysical Year of 1958. Scientists conducted extensive seismic surveys of the Antarctic interior, shooting sound waves through the ice to map the ground beneath. They discovered that if you remove the ice cap, Antarctica is not one continent, it is an archipelago. The Transantarctic Mountains divide the land into 2 distinct parts, East Antarctica and West Antarctica. Buache's frozen sea corresponds almost perfectly to the subglacial basin that actually divides the continent. Buache somehow knew that Antarctica was split in 2, a fact that was buried under miles of ice and completely unknown to 18th century science. Critics point out that Buache was a theorist who believed in a frozen sea at the poles based on his study of currents, and that he got lucky. They say his correct depiction of a divided continent was a hypothesis that happened to be right. But luck is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. To guess the existence of a continent is one thing. To correctly guess its complex, hidden structural geology is another. It suggests that the ancient source maps didn't just chart the coast, they charted the bedrock. But while the South Pole holds secrets of the past, the North Pole holds a legend that divides the internet. Number 7. The Mercator map of the North Pole, 1569. Gerardus Mercator is the father of modern cartography. If you look at a map on your wall or your phone today, you are looking at a projection he invented. He was the gold standard of accuracy. Yet in 1569, when he turned his attention to the North Pole, he drew something that looks like it belongs in a fantasy novel. Mercator depicted the North Pole not as an ice cap, but as a massive landmass divided into 4 distinct islands by 4 inward-flowing rivers. In the dead center, at the exact geographic pole, stood a massive black rock, the Rupes Nigra, or Black Rock, a magnetic mountain that he believed was the source of the Earth's magnetic field. He labeled this Hyperborea. Mercator insisted this wasn't mythology. He cited an earlier lost account from a traveler named Canoyan, who claimed to have visited this northern paradise. The map describes the currents rushing inward with such violence that no ship could ever escape. For centuries, explorers died trying to find these warm polar lands. Today, satellite imagery shows us nothing but shifting sea ice and dark water. There is no magnetic mountain, no 4 continents. Science has totally debunked this. Or have they? Here's where we hit a wall. Historians say Mercator, the man who mapped the rest of the world with genius precision, simply lost his mind when it came to the North Pole and started drawing fairy tales. But others argue that this map might depict the Arctic region before the sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, where land bridges like Doggerland actually existed. So here is the question for you.
Do you believe the father of mapmaking suddenly decided to draw fiction, or do you believe he was copying a map of a pre-deluge world that has since sunk? Historians say this is just a coincidence in mythology, but alternative researchers say it's proof of a lost epoch. Which side are you on? Tell me below. Because if land can disappear at the North Pole, it can certainly vanish in the Atlantic.
Number 6. The Zeno Map. In the 1550s, a Venetian nobleman named Niccolo Zeno published a controversial map accompanied by a series of letters. He claimed these documents were discovered in his family's attic, detailing a voyage taken by his ancestors, the Zeno brothers, in the late 1300s, a full century before Columbus. The map depicts the North Atlantic with startling detail, showing Norway, Iceland, and Greenland. But it also shows something else, huge islands that simply do not exist today. The most prominent is a massive rectangular island labeled Frisland south of Iceland, and another called Ikaria. For centuries, sailors actually treated Frisland as real. It appeared on maps by reputable cartographers, including Mercator, well into the 1600s. Ships sailed looking for it, and some even claimed to spot it on the horizon, only for it to vanish in the fog. Today, geology tells us there is no large island there. However, just beneath the surface of the North Atlantic, in the exact location of Zeno's Frisland, lies the Rockall Bank and other submerged plateaus. These are continental fragments that sunk millennia ago. The Zeno map is often dismissed as a hoax created by a Venetian trying to steal glory from Columbus. It's easy to call it a fake because the land isn't there anymore. But is it a coincidence that Zeno placed a massive island exactly where the ocean floor rises up to form a shallow bank? It's possible the Zeno brothers didn't discover these lands, but rather discovered maps of these lands from a time when sea levels were significantly lower. And if the Atlantic is hiding sunken islands, it might also be hiding the true date of the discovery of the New World. Number 5. The Cantino Planosphere, 1502. In 1502, an Italian spy named Alberto Cantino successfully bribed a Portuguese cartographer to smuggle a secret map out of Lisbon. This document, now known as the Cantino Planosphere, revealed what the Portuguese really knew about the world. It is one of the earliest maps to show the coast of Brazil and the line of the Tordesillas Treaty. But the truly shocking detail is found to the northwest. Floating in the Atlantic north of Cuba is a large fragmented landmass labeled Terra del Rey de Portugal, land of the King of Portugal. Geographically, this landmass corresponds to the peninsula of Florida. The problem? Florida wouldn't be discovered by Ponce de Leon until 1513, 11 years after this map was drawn. Even stranger, the coastline depicted on the Cantino map doesn't look like the modern Florida peninsula. It looks like Florida would have looked when sea levels were lower, with a broader landmass and different island configurations. It hints that the Portuguese, or the sources they were hoarding, had mapped the American coast long before the history books say it was possible. Mainstream historians try to explain this away by saying the landmass is actually a misplaced map of Asia, as Columbus believed he had found the East Indies. They argue the cartographer was just confused. But the spatial relationship to Cuba and the Caribbean is too accurate for a mere confusion with China. The map suggests that the age of discovery wasn't about finding new lands. It was about verifying old maps of lands that were already known to a select few. And if they knew about America, they might have known about lands that were lost entirely.
Number 4. The Ibn Ben Zara Map, 1497. This map is a glitch in the matrix, drawn in 1497 by a cartographer named Ibn Ben Zara in Alexandria, strictly for navigational use. It should be a standard map of the Mediterranean, and at first glance, it is. It shows Europe and North Africa. But when you look closer at the details, reality starts to warp. The map depicts islands in the Aegean Sea that do not exist today. Even more striking, it depicts many existing islands as being much larger than they are, and some are connected by land bridges that haven't existed for thousands of years. The level of detail is startling. The map seems to show the Mediterranean region as it looked during the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were over 300 feet lower than they are today. It shows river valleys extending into the sea, valleys that are now underwater canyons. Most confusing of all, it depicts glaciers in parts of the British Isles, which were indeed there 10,000 years ago, but certainly not in 1497. This leads to a violent disagreement. Historians say this is just a case of bad drawing and scaling errors common in medieval times, but alternative theorists argue this is proof that Ben Zara was copying a source map from a pre-flood civilization. It's the only way to explain the glacial features in the land bridges. So what do you think? Was Ben Zara a terrible artist, or was he a librarian preserving the geography of the Ice Age? Let me know in the comments. Because if the Mediterranean can hold secrets of a lost time, the Atlantic holds the key to the biggest legend of all. Number 3. The King Jaime World Map, 1375. This masterpiece, also known as the Catalan Atlas, was created for King Charles V of France. It is the pinnacle of medieval knowledge, famous for its depiction of Mansa Musa holding a gold nugget. But we are looking at the Atlantic Ocean. The map depicts the Canary Islands with incredible detail, labeling them the Fortunate Isles.
In classical mythology, these islands were the mountaintops of a sunken continent, a paradise in the west. The map shows them not just as navigational points, but as significant, populated hubs. What makes this curious is the linguistic connection. The names used for the islands on this 1375 map are derived from ancient sources that predate the European rediscovery of the Canaries. The map implies a continuity of knowledge, that these islands were never truly lost to the cartographers, only to the public. Some theorists believe the detailed depiction of these Atlantic islands is the last remnant of the geography of Atlantis, the high peaks that remained above water when the rest of the continent sank. While the map doesn't explicitly draw a continent labeled Atlantis, it gives the Atlantic Ocean a texture of history and habitation that contradicts the idea of it being a terrifying empty void. It suggests the ocean was a bridge, not a barrier. And as we move from the islands of the East Atlantic to the mysteries of the West, we find a globe that breaks the timeline of exploration entirely.
Number 2. The Schöner Globe, 1523. Johann Schöner was a German polymath who created a series of famous globes. His 1523 globe is a smoking gun in the world of forbidden cartography. This globe depicts the southern hemisphere with a massive continent surrounding the pole. But the devil is in the detail of South America. The globe clearly shows a strait separating the southern tip of South America from the southern landmass. This is the Strait of Magellan. Here is the problem. Ferdinand Magellan had only returned from his circumnavigation, well, his ship had, in late 1522. The data from that voyage was highly protected state execution property of the Spanish crown. It is highly unlikely that Schöner, in Germany, could have received, processed, and engraved a globe with this geographical feature so quickly. Furthermore, Schöner's depiction of the southern continent, which he called Brasilia Regio, is distinct and massive, suggesting he wasn't just relying on Magellan's flea-bitten report of a passage, but on an older understanding that the continents were separate. Schöner seemingly knew the geography of the southern tip of the world before the official data could have possibly reached him in such detail. He was tapping into the same reservoir of ancient knowledge that our next map used. He knew the continents were divided. He knew the way through. But while Schöner hinted at the truth, our number 1 pick is the map that forces science to its knees. Number 1. The Piri Reis Map, 1513. In 1929, historians were cleaning out the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul when they found something that shouldn't exist. It was a map drawn on gazelle skin by a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis in the year 1513. Reis was a meticulous man. He noted in the margins that he didn't chart this himself. Instead, he compiled it from 20 older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. At first glance, it looks like a standard portolan chart of the Atlantic, but when your eyes drift south past the coast of Brazil, the map shows a landmass that connects to South America and curls eastward. This is where the headache begins for geologists. The map depicts the coastline of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, but it doesn't show the icy wasteland we know today. It shows bays, islands, and river mouths. In 1949, a joint British-Swedish reconnaissance mission used seismic sounding to map the bedrock beneath the mile-thick ice sheet of Antarctica for the first time. The result? The bedrock matched the Piri Reis map almost perfectly. The map depicts Antarctica as it looked before it was covered in ice, a condition that hasn't existed for at least 6,000 years, and possibly millions. How could a Turkish admiral in 1513 possess accurate data of a sub-glacial coastline that modern science only discovered with sonar technology in the 20th century? Skeptics argue that Reis simply ran out of paper and bent the coast of South America to fit the page, creating a visual coincidence. It's a logical, comforting explanation that keeps the history books intact. But the sheer mathematical precision of the longitudes, something Europeans couldn't calculate accurately until the invention of the chronometer centuries later, suggests Reis wasn't drawing a mistake. He was copying a source from a civilization that had mapped the world when Antarctica was green. This map is the ultimate evidence that we are living in the ruins of a forgotten world. History is a puzzle, and it seems we are missing the most important pieces. These maps suggest that our timeline of discovery is wrong, and that the ancients knew the face of the Earth better than we do. If you want to join the few who question the official narrative, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You are now part of the tribe that looks deeper. I'll see you next one.